Okay, welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, J.R. Stewart.
And I am your co host, Tommy Duncan. It is March 16th, 2022, Wednesday night, Jimmy. And if it is Wednesday night, it is Black
Definitely
Men
Black
Speak.
Men Speak. So we want to give a shout out, even though we didn't play our intro tonight, to Liquid for providing our theme music. And if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so when new shows are uploaded, you'll be notified. You can always go back to our channel and watch previous shows that have been recorded. With that being said, Tom, why don't you introduce our guest and tell us what the topic is for tonight?
Oh, man, I am so excited about tonight's show. We have two very power packed special guests and contributors tonight that I want to thank for sharing some of their thought leadership and their experiences with. And, both of them I know personally just through different roadmaps. And both of them have a lot to contribute this evening. And it looks like Edward fell off, and I'm pretty sure he'll join back on again. So, our topic for tonight's show, the blueprint for empowering Black America. The blueprint for empowering Black America. What can we do as individual households, small businesses, entrepreneurs, folks in all facets of life in order to build and or rebuild and strengthen our economy within the Black community. So we're going to have a very, very fun conversation tonight. So what we're going to do before we get the conversation started, and we're going to give Edward a minute to join us again so that we can make sure that we get both intros. But either way, we're going to get started. Brother Stafford, first we're going to have you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your personal, professional background, what you do, and hopefully by that time, Edward will rejoin us and we will have him to introduce himself as well.
No problem. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you for asking me and permitting me to be on this podcast, Tommy, Jimmy, and Edward. And I'm Paul Stafford. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about me and about what I do and how we can help to empower the African American community, which I believe is one of the most important issues which we must face. And it is a great imperative of not only African American society, but of society as a whole. For me, I am an attorney in Dallas, Texas, at Stafford Moore. That's staffordmoore.law if you're going to look it up on the internet, Moore. And we are a business litigation, insurance coverage litigation, intellectual property, corporate law firm. What does that mean? That means we're a business boutique. We're we're a business boutique law firm that helps lawyers to help people in the business community to get back to their business because that's what they need to do. We also do handle some advocacy work. We've got a few civil rights cases and wrongful death cases. So we're not all about the corporate dollar. We also help people who are wronged and have civil rights claims. And I think briefly my training and my experience over the 28 years that I've been doing this have led to this moment. And I'm blessed to be in this moment. But I was a prosecutor early in my career in both Denton and Dallas counties. I was an organized crime prosecutor. I worked in a corporate legal environment in two different corporations. I've worked for two very large, formerly white firms, big tall building firms. And I've had my own law firm twice. This is the second iteration of the Stafford law firm. I've also been the president of a couple of bar associations, the Dallas Bar Association in 2012, and the J.L. Turner Legal Association, which has historically been the African American law group here in Dallas. And so, again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about how we can make a difference with some of the advice that we can give for some of the things that we need to accomplish individually and collectively.
Well, thank you so much.
We actually had one of our listeners tonight who is watching, and he noticed that Texas A&M lamp behind you. So what class was it? 89, 90? What class are you? Paul?
They tell me I was class 90. I'm just still waiting on them to call me and tell me I was 3 credits short.
All right, class of 90. All right, go get them. All right, we have Edward back. So, Edward, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Okay. So the easiest way is actually to start at what I do and kind of work backwards to understand how I got here. So my company is Prospector Works. And what we do as a firm is advise registered investment advisors on how to grow their business. And we work with LPL, we work with Merrill Lynch, now called Merrill. We basically work with almost every major brokerage firm in the country at some point in time. In a lot of times with some of their newer representatives, but also some of their 4 and 5 man offices that are separate from their primary office. We do a tremendous amount of advertising for them. We do a tremendous amount of customer contact for them to kind of build their brand and explain to businessmen in particular and wealthy people who they are and why they should be talking to them. I came into this particular company starting in 2017 from a background as an investment advisor myself. Started off after college in the insurance industry with MetLife. And that quickly evolved into, as the insurance industry was changing, into becoming a financial planner, a certified financial planner, and selling mutual funds along with the insurance, real estate investment partnerships, oil and gas partnerships, every kind of exchange traded fund, mutual fund that there was out there. We did it at both MetLife and then eventually at Cigna when that merger happened between Connecticut General and INA. And I was with them for about 15 years in Atlanta, Georgia, transitioned back to Dallas in the mid 1990s and went through a series of about three boutique brokerage firms selling specialized investment products, mostly around real estate, oil and gas, and eventually ended up working for Fidelity as a trainer, training representatives as they were hired, left Fidelity with a group of senior VPs from Fidelity who formed their own firm, company called Acceleration Retirement, as VP of development and training with them. When I left them, that's when I started my own firm. So almost my entire background from college has been financial services, one way or another, either as a producer, as a trainer, or in some type of marketing of helping that particular industry connect with the general public.
Okay. Perfect.
And that really is about it.
Good deal. So for our listeners who are out there, we have 2 folks who know a lot about making money, about creating businesses, who know a lot about structuring businesses and building wealth at an individual and an institutional level. And it's very intentional that we have them both here. So without wasting a lot of time, we'd like to really dig into the meat and the potatoes of the conversation, which is building wealth within the Black community, building economy within the Black community. Jimmy, we've had a lot of conversations in the past as it pertains to consumerism.
Yes.
Obviously, we understand that the United States is a consumer-driven economy. But when we look at the Black community, in a lot of cases, we are prolific consumers in this economy, considering the percentage of the overall population in the United States. And we have these conversations pretty regularly about turning the page from being prolific consumers and spenders to being producers, because we understand we have the creativity. We understand that we have certain skill sets, but it seems like other folk in other communities get greater benefit than we do.
Yes,
so
do,
we want to talk a little bit about this, how we begin to create the roadmap and the blueprint for growing and scaling wealth within our community, so to speak. So we're going to start off, Edward, with you and kind of talk a little bit about an historical, I guess, a historical narrative to present. So when we look at the Black community pre-civil rights, even though it was through legalized segregation, the dollar flipped a lot of times within the Black community. And we had these economies that
Mhm.
were forced upon us by the government, because obviously our grandparents and great-great-grandparents could only do business with themselves. And so we had economies and economies of scales. Everyone knows about Greenwood or Rosewood or many other populations throughout the United States in the early 20th century, but something kind of happened.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your perspective, and then Paul, I'm going to have you to add to that as well. What happened to our economy?
Well, number one, and you really kind of explained it in your opening there, is that there was a lack of choice. If you wanted someone to come in and do floors in your house, you weren't going to go to white people to do it. Number one, they probably wouldn't even let you walk into their business to talk to them.
Right.
And if you were able to get in and talk to them, they would tell you right away that you couldn't afford them, even if you could, and you would have to go in search of somebody else. So we developed within our community all the resources that we needed to expand that community by necessity, because we didn't have the option of going anywhere else. If you wanted a doctor and you are an African American man, white doctors were not going to treat you. So we had to have Black doctors in the community. And we could spend the next hour talking about every different service, every different product that we needed, but we produced for ourselves.
Right.
Well, the civil rights movement, integration, things like that started to open options up for us as to where we spent the dollars that we earned. And in many cases, and especially in small towns, I think it really started in small towns before it reached the city, is that you had African Americans who had become somewhat educated leaving those small towns, going for opportunities in the city, even if they were going to the city where they were going to a predominantly African American part of a city. So a lot of what would have been replacing tradesmen, small business owners, that type of thing in those small towns disappeared. And you start, instead of going to a Black greengrocer, you start going to Piggly Wiggly, where the white people shop. And maybe the little town where I grew up in, you could go there anytime. I'm sure there were places where they had days that African Americans could go there and shop, hours of the day where African Americans could go there and shop, because everybody needed that. Miss So-and-so cleans my house, she does need to buy groceries. So the city or the little town was going to make it available to them. We lost brain power in those small towns. And that stopped those small towns from being able to replicate the doctors, the teachers, the 2 or 3 African American attorneys, the plumber, the electrician, so on and so forth, that were in those towns. So they're gone. But for a while, our cities continued to thrive. I mean, right here in Dallas, Texas, my own uncle had a thriving business where he was rehabbing homes and putting roofs on houses and different things like that, and making a fantastic living doing it. And there were restaurant owners, there were plumbers, there were electricians within the African American community that were doing well. There were lawyers and teachers and accountants. I mean, everything that you can name in Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
They were thriving. Education and money and the want for something better for everybody caused people to start to drift out into other communities, other opportunities. It wasn't so long ago that moving from Oak Cliff to a DeSoto or Lancaster was a big deal. You were going out there where white folks were. That's not the case anymore. Going to Cedar Hill was integrating Cedar Hill. Going to Grand Prairie was integrating Grand Prairie. That is not the case anymore. So we have dispersed as a population based on our own economy growing, and that's kind of a natural thing. But what we haven't done is we have not continued to either on the one hand, offer quality services that are visible and available, and also seek out quality services that are visible and available from our own community.
Good
So
deal.
we've had a disconnect there.
Gotcha. Now, Paul, let me ask you this, because I mean, with you being, the great legal mind on this, and we go back to people, like Thurgood Marshall and his predecessors and folks who said, it's really an opportunity to have access to better education, or the best education that you can get. And then, using the law on our side. So we get through civil rights, and, you have the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, you have the Fair Housing Act, and all of those things, which in essence would open up opportunities for our grandparents and great grandparents to be able to live any place that they wanted to. So in theory, it seemed like, it's a great opportunity for us to scale up and grow and prosper even further as a community. But what are your thoughts on some of the implications, good and bad, when we look at what happened after the civil rights, when we start looking at 10 or 20 years later, when it happened to our economy, from your perspective, especially, since law and access was the big thing?
Well, as Edward said, we could turn a 1 hour discussion into about a 5 hour discussion, but I won't do that. I will say that I think that if you're looking at empowerment through the lens of the law, then you should look at it in terms of Reconstruction's post-enslavement. And this is as much a history lesson as it is an economic lesson, but 250 years, if you're assuming Point Comfort in 1619, 1620, you're assuming 240, 250 years to the Civil War. So even upon the 13th Amendment being passed, and the 14th and the 15th Amendments as well, the Reconstruction Amendments, as they are called, that's a 250-year lag time. So to equality. And equality is actually not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution until the 14th Amendment. It's not in there. And so we went about 250 years with certain assumptions, which are legal fictions for people that were not white male landowners. And I think that's an important context to talk about how do you empower people now. You have to know from which you came, not necessarily who you are, but what you are. And within that context, the Reconstruction happened of sorts. The Reconstruction Amendments, 63, 65, 68, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, freeing the slaves, giving them due process, equal protection, and voting rights, effectively. But then Reconstruction got arrested. The development of the Reconstruction got arrested by the Compromise of 1876, when Rutherford Hayes won the presidency because he got the Southerners, the Southern legislators, to agree to support his candidacy if the Republicans would pull the federal troops out of the South. And so that effectively ended Reconstruction that lasted about 10 years-ish, 11 years-ish. Texas had black legislators. We had people that were African-American business owners, government officials. We were actually trying to play catch-up, if you will, or actually give the Constitution the meaning of its creed, for lack of a better term. And so this is important chronology, because when you had that arrested development in 1876 through the Compromise, we really didn't see the second Reconstruction until the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. So that's another 85 years, about 90 years, before we could point to the Civil Rights Acts of 64 and the Voting Rights Acts of 65. That's about 90 years to say, okay, now I think we're equal again. We haven't done away with Jim Crow, we haven't done away with discrimination, but legally on the books, we've tried to equalize the playing field. So really, we're only 2 generations removed, 60 years from what legally should be considered equality. I won't be too long-winded, but I think that informs what we're talking about in terms of economic empowerment.
Right.
Because the great unspoken in America is class. It's the great unspoken. It's not race, it's class. And it's not linear, it's multidimensional. So when you take away the artificial impediments to racial equality, which the corollary would be the right to exercise your liberty, you still have an opportunity, but you may not have a true opportunity to really enjoy the fruits of full citizenship. How do we address that as a people? Well, we know our history, for one, which I think we could learn a lot about our history, and that should help us towards our future. But also we need to realize that even though we are legally equal on the books, on the legal books, we have access to capital like we should among the banking institutions. We don't have access to educational opportunities like we should among our educational institutions. And our housing and other health factors are lagging because why? Because of about a 350-year lag time. That's the primary reason. I'll leave you with this on this part. It is also incumbent on us to carry the burden of our success. I've often said it's hard to strangle the neck of the fact that you're writing. And some people may be offended by that, but I don't care. Because I think it's important that if you're going to ride someone back, then you can't strangle them. You have to ride their back.
Right.
And if you're going to strangle them, then you shouldn't ride their back. What does
What
that
does
mean?
that mean?
It means that you have to set up your own paradigm for economic success and not wait for someone else to give that to you solely. Because if you're waiting for that to happen to you while strangling the means of production, that's counterproductive. You should stand toe to toe with what you believe success is and say what you think it should articulate and try to equalize that playing field. And so I think often we need to think about what we can do for ourselves as much as what needs to be done for us. That's what that really is.
Good deal. So let me shift into a different gear. So we're already about 25 minutes past the hour. And Jimmy, if you could monitor the chat session. So if there are any questions or thoughts that come up that we need to kind of steer
Not so
to.
far, but we got one.
Okay.
But I'll take care of it.
Okay, good deal. And then also for those of you who are watching, if you're watching live, we do have a number at the bottom. So feel free to call in, ask questions as we go through this, because we're going to move through this pretty fast with the time that we have. So taking the foundation, Edward, that you talked about financially, and then Paul, kind of talking through the challenge, the continuum of time that we're looking at, and talking about getting control of our economy, controlling our communities, and therefore controlling our own destinies. There's an economic conversation. There's a psychology that we have to deal with that quite frankly is probably more important and leads to the economic conversation. And then there's some decisions that have to be made. So Edward, let's kind of talk about where we are and the things that we must do, because, when we look at a lot of, and Jim, we've had these conversations, we have cities across America that population wise are significantly Black, but the politics and the control is not within the hands of a lot of those citizens. If we look at what's going on in our education, sometimes it's not folks in our community who are controlling what's being taught in our education system in the state of Texas and or otherwise. So let's kind of talk about what empowerment should mean, and then have a conversation as how we go about getting there, because the economic drives the politics, and then that drives the social power.
Okay, so I think we're all in agreement that you have to educate people to the highest possible level if they want to go. So in our community, that a lot of times means that we have to push for specialized higher levels. People call them AP classes, whatever. We have to push for that, even if it disparately leaves some of our young people behind or makes them feel that they are not up to snuff. That for the people that want to excel, in our community, we have to create pathways for them to excel. For individuals that are, say, post high school, even post secondary education, that want to take the talents and the abilities that they have, and they want to start growing their own individual and then ultimately community economy, we have to create pathways for them with capital to be able to capital, legal advice, accounting advice, all these things, for them to be able to move into their field of expertise and have a foundation to grow a business, not necessarily in our community where they live, but a thriving business that allows them to hire and train and develop another class of people of our race with them, and prepare those people to also be able to go out and do the same thing. Sometimes, and I'm guilty of this as anybody else, of getting caught up in the idea that our businesses have to be in our community. They don't. Our businesses have to be situated in places that they can succeed. So it depends on the type of business that you have and where your customer base is. But the biggest thing is identifying individuals who have the expertise to create businesses that will grow and expand and hire and have more than one location and all these things.
Right.
And as Paul was saying, we don't have the capital concentration. We have the capital, but we don't concentrate our capital to get behind those particular businesses and help them succeed.
But
when you do that and you empower those people and enrich those individuals, we also have to convince them, and this is something you and I talked about the other night, of going in and gentrifying with their capital. We need to gentrify our own neighborhoods. If we're comfortable with those neighborhoods, we want to retain those neighborhoods, we should be the ones that are gentrifying those neighborhoods.
I agree.
Because we are the ones that know them well enough that we can also put in safeguards for elderly people. If you're taking elderly people out of single family homes, and you're building multi-purpose buildings, retail on the bottom, you got housing on top of that, there should be a certain number of those units that we create that allows those older people to live there at a reduced rate while we're selling at a market rate to everybody else. We take care of our own communities. We can't, as Paul said, we can't depend on other people to do that for us, right?
Great.
And in many cases, when we're moving in and doing stuff, we're not even doing it to take care of our people in our community. But we need to start to do that because we need those voices, we need that strength, we need that historical perspective that those individuals bring. We need that richness in our community along with all the generations under them.
So just to make sure that I understand what you're saying, or quite frankly, some of our listeners, simplifying what you say, am I hearing something that's similar to, creating lanes for the talented 10th in addition to lanes for the vocational, the tradesmen? Help me understand just to make sure.
All of that. So, Paul is in one of those professions that has barriers to entry, right? You got to pass the bar exam.
Yep.
CPAs, to become a CPA, there's a barrier to entry.
Okay.
To become an electrician, there's a barrier to entry at the highest level.
Yes,
Same thing with plumbing and all these different professions that actually pay a lot of money, that if these businesses are grown properly, can actually employ a broad number of people and have a really wide impact. And within those professions, you can mentor and train and bring up other individuals to replicate what you're doing, right? And in many cases, individuals that you are training and that you're empowering, well, let's just say that if we wanted to, we could make sure a majority of those individuals look like us.
And Jimmy, I thought you might have a question there, and then Paul, I'm going to ask you to kind of put your point on this as well.
Well, I was going to sort of a pin to the question that you asked the other gentleman here. We were talking about capital, and I just wanted to point out and have you guys comment on, a few years ago back when President Obama was our president, he gave the city of Baltimore $1 billion. And today all they have to show for it is a community center. If he had given the four of us and put us in charge of $1 billion to rescue Baltimore, it would be free today. So in Baltimore, it's a black city, black run, and so when we
Right.
have opportunities, when we have opportunity to do the right thing, we can't do what other people want us to do and expect us to do when we have the larger need, which is freeing our community. Why the black leadership there didn't take the money and free black people, I don't know. But AT&T got the bulk of the money. They got over $400 million of the $1 billion, and I'm not sure how they help black people at all. But that's something we have to be conscious of. That it's not always a lack of capital that holds us back. Sometimes we have access to capital, we just don't do the right thing with it.
That, Jimmy, I understand where you're going with that. To me, that's not access to capital. That's an impediment to access to capital, is that you gave it to a governmental entity.
That's why I said
that's
you
my
give
own
it to the
personal.
four of us to put in charge
Right.
of it. Non-governmental entity, you are absolutely correct. That's why I
Yeah.
preface that by saying if we were in charge of the money, the four of us, Baltimore would be
Right.
free today.
Yeah, there are accelerator programs that run nationwide that are there, and they have money that they have gathered from other wealthy individuals, institutions. They're in place to make money for that accelerator by directly investing in entrepreneurs who have great ideas, have great work ethic, and are willing to build businesses in the proper way. Starting with somebody like Paul, setting up your corporation, in the right way, cross-checking trademarks. I mean, all these different things that people that need to be checked off of a list of when somebody says, well, I want to go into business as a plumber. Okay, well, go get your license. Then what do? There's a process and a procedure to becoming a true professional, successful profession in your area of expertise.
And Paul, go ahead.
No, let me just finish with this too.
Oh, sure.
There's the personal development side, but there's also the business development side.
Yes, sir. That's right.
And we have small businesses sometimes that we mingle the two, and they have to be separated. You have to look at your business as a separate branch of your life, and the decisions you make about your business are different than the personal development things that you do with your own life, but at the same time, they should track. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
Right.
Is that, but before I go hire 40 people, I need to know that I have the management expertise to manage 40 people, that I've also planned out my finances enough to know at what stage I'm hiring those people and what they will be doing, and which ones of them will be middle management, and which ones of them will be doing these acts, and how much they will be paid. All of this is planned out. But to get there, I have to have a certain level of personal development that comes from mentoring and other different things that we can incorporate outside of the business just for that individual business owner.
So, Paul, I want you to kind of add to that and speak to this because, I mean, and I'm talking pre-COVID numbers now. I forgot exactly what the number was. I want to say there was, 1.5 plus, million Black-owned businesses in America. A lot of them, of course, got wiped away during COVID. But, to your point, Edward, most of our companies don't have 40 employees. 95% of them have one.
Yes.
So
right.
Kind of speak to what Edward was talking about and what you see on that side, because what he's talking about is very important, but this is something that you do for a living.
Well, I would say a couple things. One is that if you assume 340 million Americans, give or take, there's about 40 million African Americans, about 11.5, 12% of the population. We have $1 trillion purchasing power.
Yes.
$1 trillion of purchasing power among our people. And that's actually a very conservative estimate.
Yes.
Right.
And so what do we do with that? We don't usually patronize African American businesses.
We don't.
And there is a certain nuance to actually defining what an African American business is. And I say that because we have minority women-owned business enterprises, MWBEs, but we also have businesses that are not Black-owned that primarily cater to African Americans. And so we should be careful when we talk about Black-owned businesses, because a lot of the businesses
Right.
that we do rely on aren't owned by Black people at all, but benefit us predominantly. But as an aside, I would say one of the things that and I'm getting to your question, Tommy. One of the things that I think is worth noting is we've got a substantial amount of power, but our dollar doesn't turn over more than once or 1.5 times in our community, whereas opposed to other affinity groups, particularly ethnic groups, that dollar turns over 3 to 5, sometimes even 7 to 9 times by some estimates in
Very
those
conservative.
communities. And those are very conservative numbers.
Right.
And so I think we should concentrate on trying to find a way to infuse capital, our existing capital, into some of our existing businesses and to create additional businesses. So that's where it's important. And that's a self-serving statement, but it's important to get proper advice early on so that you know how to establish your entity, your business, you know how to establish a business plan, and know how to create a financial plan, how to get financing, how to hire people, how to fire people, how to market. And that's an important aspect that I think we are lacking in our community. Because of, again, I think because of the lag time in us having access to being able to develop those skill sets. So to my earlier statement about riding a back and strangling a neck, I think it deserves just a little bit better treatment because we have an economic base on our own. We have to utilize our own base. And if you want to put it in historical or rhetorical terms, you could talk about Booker T. Washington's aspect of what the Black community should be doing for itself. His philosophy, as opposed to W.E.B. Du Bois, was that we should optimize on everything we have the opportunity to optimize on right now, because it would strengthen our position in terms of what we're asking for from the majority culture. In many ways, Malcolm X shared that same philosophy. We should optimize on everything we're able to do right now because we can strengthen our position in terms of asking for more in the majority culture. And you can contrast that with the W.E.B. Du Bois and to some extent Dr. Martin Luther King, who says, no, we are men. We are equal now. We need to demand these rights now. And neither is right and neither is wrong, but maybe both is right or all four are right. Because I think what we need to do is have a duality about how we approach economic empowerment. We have to do for ourselves while we also expect society to help us to do for ourselves. Because candidly, we have not been entitled to things, and there is a certain degree of repair work, some people may say reparations, maybe remediation that goes with allowing us to get the equality which we have sought. And just a little more of that, Tommy, by way of example, we can start our own businesses. Yes, we should start our own businesses. We should empower our own communities. And I mean communities in the holistic sense, not a geographic sense. It's in the holistic sense, the aggregate. We should also demand that non-minority businesses treat us fairly, employ us, elevate us, promote us, hire us, retain us, and treat us with the respect that they would treat others. So there's a duality to that. Another example, we have educational institutions of our own. They're historically Black institutions. We should support them. We should support them with our dollars, with our intellectual capital, with our students, with our young minds. We should also demand that we have equal access to educational opportunities at predominantly white institutions. I'll give you another example. We should patronize professional services within our community.
Yes.
And there's often a term that says the white man's ice is colder. And that's how a lot of us think. This has got two professionals, they're going to go to the one that's not the minority.
White is
but
right.
You know what? We should demand that we be treated with respect when we're in majority culture, as well as building up our own. So that's what I was saying about having a duality in the way that we approach economic development, not simply waiting for something to be given to us, like the city of Baltimore had $1 billion given to it, but also saying we're going to put our buckets down where we are. We're going to empower our own communities while we are level setting in majority culture. So I see that we work with a lot of small businesses, a lot of startups, a lot of mid caps. Unfortunately, not a lot of them, or not as many of them, are minority owned as should be. But I do see a trend where obviously the majority of businesses in America are solo and small shops. That's the majority of the American economy. mom and pop shops, solo small shops. So what I see is I see a need for good advice on the front end of that process. I see a need for a strategic plan, 3 to 5 years process among minority communities, particularly African American communities. And I see a need to try to access capital and intellectual and human capital to try to uplift our community while demanding and requiring that we be respected in the workplace and in society as a whole.
Quick question to our panel. How important is the skill of selling in business development?
Well, I would say it depends on your ability to sell. Somewhat depends on who your market is, because there are some products and services that are such a necessity that you don't have to be a very good salesman. What you have to be is very good at that profession. And when the opportunity is presented to you, the job itself will lead people to talk about you and open you up to other people who get
What's
to
an
know
example? A quick example.
The best example that I can come up with really is accountants and CPAs. When people find really good accountants and CPAs, they tend to spread the word like wildfire. The same thing with really good, competent plumbers.
Good contractors,
If you're
yes.
a homeowner, contractors in general. Plumbers is a big deal. I don't know why, but yeah, a really good plumber, the word gets out on a really good plumber very fast, and typically they can't keep up with the work that comes their way. So it really kind of depends on the profession that you're in, of how much selling you have to do. And I always differentiate selling from marketing. And a lot of people are very good salesmen, but they're very poor marketers, and vice versa, right? So, and this is where having really good professionals around you, starting with an attorney and then, working with business planning people to determine where you fit as a business. And I think this goes even with the mom and pops and the larger companies, is you really have to understand who you are, what services you offer, and who your real market is to know how to best communicate with that marketplace. In many cases, you don't want to be out there selling. The marketing itself and then the servicing, once you have a contract, is what's going to carry you.
Let me ask you this, and this is going to both of you. You have about 15 minutes left, so we're going to have to really get some pen to the paper. And then what I am actually going to do is put in a shameless plug that we're going to have you guys back within the next month, because we're just starting to get on some fire here.
Yes.
Yes, sir. So I'm just putting in a shameless plug for our listeners right now who are saying, you know what, now, bro, 15 minutes, we need to have these guys back. So I'm just telling y'all right now, we need to have both of y'all back in another month so we can continue this conversation. What does this mean? And I'm speaking for some of our listeners, to the average household. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not working for myself. I don't know. I'm a teacher, or let's just say I'm a corporate accountant, or whatever it is. How does this relate to me, this conversation that you are having? What can I do about this? I don't see myself as complicit in this highfalutin talk that y'all talking about in terms of building a blueprint to empower Black America. What does it have to do with me?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, as Paul said earlier, you can sure contribute capital, right?
Right.
Is that if there is an accelerator around you, or what do we used to call them? Incubators.
Incubators. Yes.
They call them accelerators now. If there's one around you that is run by competent African American people, give them $500, right? 100 people giving $500, and then all of a sudden you got $50,000 in that accelerator to help. And how do you find them, right? How do you find them?
And I'm talking about the brother who's like, man, if I was to give $500 out of my household paycheck, man, my wife would throw me out of the house, and she would change the locks.
Well, that individual is already giving more than that. If they're on a job and have a 401k, they're already sticking more than that into their 401k on an annual basis, or an IRA or something like that. Or, they're trying to pick stocks, exchange traded funds. Maybe they're playing in crypto. all these things. They're doing something with $500 that they could help build an accelerator. And the accelerator, if it is run properly and chooses properly the entrepreneurs to back, long term is going to give them more return on investment probably than their 401k, unless they got an excellent matching program.
So how
Right.
do they find out? Go ahead, Paul.
I'm going to add something to that from a little different angle. I think that African Americans have had accelerators and incubators since slavery. And
Okay.
Explain that.
well, I think because we've had to insulate ourselves against corrupting forces to our full citizenship. We've had to infuse the ability of our institutions to succeed. We've had to give it assistance internally. I will be on the border of being sacrilegious, but the church is an excellent example of that. The church is not just a religious institution, a spiritual institution, it's a financial institution.
Yes, it is.
And so if you use the model of the Black political party, which is the church, and say, how is the church successful regardless of whether we were in bondage or not? You say, you know what, because of stewardship, not marketing, not salesmanship, stewardship. I owe it to the church because it's the church, because it's bigger than me. And I believe in what they're trying to do. Aside from my individual gain, I might gain individually, but I'm working for the collective. And so I will infuse the efforts of the church and incubate the things that they're doing to tutor kids after school, to try to give meals to people that need meals. And I think that spirit has carried over into some of our businesses. I think it carried over into the spirit of Greenwood before the 21 riots. I think it carried over into Rosewood before the 22 riots, the lynchings of the 20s. I think it carried over into our business communities before Jim Crow caught up with our ability to succeed. I think it's still going on. And so what I would say is, I think, incubators are great, an organized effort to try to infuse productivity into our business community. But we already have a lot of built-in incubators in our community. If you got your hair cut or got your hair done or got some food or went to a thrift store or went to a gas station or a repair shop, you could do that in a Black community. You can infuse it. You don't have to buy things outside of your community that are generic goods. They're the same good that you could buy from the corner store. And so that's one way to do it, to incubate and to support the local community. If you're going to give money, for instance, to a cause, you could give it to the United Negro College Fund. You could give it to a Black college or a group that services predominantly Black clientele. So my point is this: we are already incubating things. I think we should make sure that we try to focus that laser into our own community to benefit those that may need it more than others. And I think just the horizon shows that we still need that effort. We need it on educational opportunities, which are being rolled back. We need it on voting awareness and enfranchisement, which is being rolled back. We need it on other fronts, and that spirit can help us to be stronger as a community, which will help our economic empowerment.
So
let me ask Paul a quick question.
Sure.
And talking about the churches, do you think the churches themselves could serve a more focused role in development of business, in that they have a grounded, typically they have a grounded congregation of which there are professional, sound-minded people within those congregations, and a lot of them have skills and talent. Sometimes it's going other places. Sometimes they're trying to develop small businesses on their own. That if churches had accelerators, that would be an easy focus for individuals within our community in a lot of different areas. Even the school teacher that you referenced could start a tutoring program through her church and have tutoring income outside of, her regular Monday through Friday school income.
Well, I'm falling captive to the discussion, but the discussion is that if you are in a place of worship with people that are like-minded or of your same affinity group, I'm not even going to say look like you, because nobody really looks like me. So what I'm going to say is they're of your same concern. They have your same shared interests. Then there are such things as Black business directories. You can find out who is a member of a church, or you can look at a Black Chamber of Commerce and find out where the Black churches even are. So I think that they could work in concert under the auspices of still staying true to their IRS tax-free status, because they can't do certain things. They can't take certain stances. But I think these things work in concert because that is our most trusted institution. Historically, Black colleges and universities and Black churches are our most trusted institutions that have stood the test of time for over 200 years. So I agree with you, but I think they have to work in concert with existing resources. For instance, Black business directories. So if you go to a town that you don't know anybody, you'll know, yeah, I can look up this church or this Black business directory and find out where can I get really good seafood instead of going to a restaurant that doesn't really value our business.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about a lot in one of the groups, and I'm with a group that is in the process of chartering a credit union. And one of the things we talk about a lot is the amount of money that our churches have in white financial institutions. That, I mean, this whole idea of our churches being one of the financial foundations of our community. I mean, TD Jakes, his church out there, they do a lot of stuff in housing and employment and, all these different things. And I'm sure a lot of other churches do as well. The big thing I don't see them doing, and maybe it's because I'm not an attendee at these places, is this entrepreneurial side. And I just think from a trust standpoint within our community and an access standpoint within our community, that they could involve themselves in these things without ever touching on or putting in jeopardy their 501c3 status. There are a lot of accelerators out there that are nonprofit accelerators. The church could become a part of that. Some of our larger institutions could. And of course, Paul Quinn College does something like that. They have an entrepreneurial program set up at Paul Quinn.
If you've ever been to
that has been pretty successful.
If you've ever been to TD, empowerment events or other events, they're not. It's not unique. It's a great event, but more things of that nature and a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach to the complex problem of empowerment is what we would need. Which goes back to your point, which is that's stuff that we're doing for us. That's
right.
Not low-lying fruit, but it's things that we can do to strengthen our position relative to walking into a boardroom and saying, "Here's what you owe us." If we utilize that $1 trillion of purchase power and say that we focus it now, we're utilizing businesses that respect us, that have certain views that we agree with, and they're not discriminating against us, either inside their ranks or external to their ranks. That would get people's attention. And I've often said, if you were standing next to somebody called Power, and you were underserved, your name is underserved, and you're standing next to Power, and Power asked you, "What would you want? What's the one thing I could do for you?" We should know what that answer is. We don't know. I know
what the answer is. They ask me. Just get out of my way.
Yeah. Well,
just get out of the way. Quit restricting me. Get out of the way.
I hear that, but I think we need to have that conversation on a national level.
Oh, we do. We do. I 100% agree with you.
What our focus is in a larger sense, and that these discussions that we're having now are imperative to that. These are the kind of discussions we need to be having all the time.
Right. And we need to have a great wealth transfer.
Yes,
sir.
From them to us, and not through the government, not through reparations, but through us having quality, high service businesses that they have to come to us. They are going to come to us.
I would say the greatest wealth transfer is from us to us, because greatest. I mean, if you look at where we spend the majority of our money, 99% of it is outside of our community. So that's the greatest opportunity.
That would be pretty big.
When you talk about something, when you mention Malcolm, or when you mentioned Booker T, what can we take advantage of right now? I think the greatest thing we can take advantage of right now is empowering ourselves at the beginning. But with the 4 minutes that we have left, Jimmy, did you have a question? And then we're going to have
well, I just had a quick comment that it's I have a different view about the Black churches. It's shameful on how they behave and haven't done more than what they're capable of doing. I don't measure what people do. I measure what people are capable of doing versus what they're doing as a ratio. And I remember in 1990 when the black churches in Dallas were trying to start a bank. They needed $5 million for the federal charter, and they had trouble raising the money when it was reported that these same churches deposit $25 million a week in the white banks. So that was in 1990 dollars. I don't know where it is now. I'm pretty sure it's a lot more, but there's so this is why I cringe when I hear that we have a capital problem when we seem to have money to build mega churches. And it's not to embarrass Potter House or Antioch or Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship or Friendship West, but it is to say when we put our minds to something, we can get it done.
Right.
And
So,
white banks are not our enemy.
No, they're
No.
not.
That's my perspective, and I know that that's not what you're saying. But I'm saying we can have strong banks, but still demand access to capital from majority institutions.
Well,
Sure.
I'd like to see Brother Edwards, put a blueprint out there on how to start a credit union in every major black population center. I think that's an excellent. In fact, when you guys get started, let me know because I want to be the first depositor to open an account with you.
Well, the first branch is going to open in St. Petersburg, Florida.
That's fine. I mean,
Yeah, and then there is a blueprint for rolling because we are going to be a federal, not a state credit
okay.
union. So there's a blueprint for rolling that credit union out and opening branches across the country. And obviously that's based on just what you just said,
And
the
we need
number
to
of
have the
people that
challenge
desire that.
Yes. Challenge
Yeah.
people to come together, take your blueprint, and do the exact. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already been worked
Right.
out for you. So, but we need that as a corner to start getting control of the economies. And like Brother Paul mentioned, a lot of businesses in the black community are not necessarily black owned, but they're key. And I'm going to mention chicken. My wife is going to cringe for me saying this, but if you pull all the chicken places out that are not black owned, you may not have very much chicken being sold in the black community, and you know what that would cause.
there would be hegemony. So as we wrap up, so there are a couple of things I want to summarize, and I want to ask each of you to give me your one thing in terms of the guide, the blueprint that we're going to make sure that we invest in the blueprint for our listeners. We've talked about contributing and supporting historically black colleges and universities, finding an incubator or an accelerator in your community that represents your interest, investing in early education for our young people. So we're building the roadmap, whether they want to be an attorney, whether they want to be an astronaut, whether they want to be a teacher, finding a black business directory and sowing some economic seeds into a black business so they can grow and expand. But what is the one thing that you would say that is the most important thing for you for building the blueprint to empower the black community? And we definitely have to continue this conversation probably next week. Edward, I'm going to ask you first, Paul, Jimmy, and I know what mine is. Mine is always the same.
Wow. So just one thing?
Okay, you can do two.
Okay.
Two or three.
Right. So to me, it's three things.
Okay.
The very first thing, and this is going to go over some people's heads, and I think that's great because I want them to reach, is you have to understand capital. You absolutely have to understand what capital is. And it's not the money you earn on your job. So you need to understand what capital is and how it comes into being. Number two is that you have to understand the process and procedure of how the economy works and how it affects you. And number three is you have to understand what your level of power is in affecting the economy. In other words, the choices that you make. And if we start under those three things, I think we're on the path to revelation.
Paul, what say you?
There was a book a while back that said everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten. That's actually not true. But in that book, or either the sequel, the author mentioned sweat the small stuff because everything is small stuff. And so I think in that respect, if you look at trying to boil an ocean or trying to do too much with this discussion, it's overwhelming. But if you look inward and say, well, what can I do in myself, in my faith, in my purpose, in my educational pursuits, in my quest to be the best that I could be, then you can start turning the ship outward and say, okay, I can help somebody else now. I can encourage someone. I can educate someone. I can employ someone. I could give someone some resources to do things that they're trying to do. So I think the most important thing that you can do is, in some respects, to be a bit selfish and try to improve who you are while you are also trying to see how can I assist others. And when you do that, then it makes it easier to try to get what you believe society should rightfully be giving you. So I think we have to operate and we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. But I think you have to start with yourself. And if we really critically examine ourselves, I think there are areas of improvement that we could find to say, you know what, I could be better positioned to help people if I was better positioned to help myself.
Jimmy, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to go with Brother Edwards here. I think the work he's doing with the credit unions is key. It's something that we definitely need. When I go through some of the poor areas of Dallas, check cash in place of the banks down there, they charge upwards of 4% to convert a check into cash, and then people turn around and buy money orders for $1 a pop to pay their bills with. I mean, that's a huge cost on the poor. So if Brother Edwards can be successful creating these credit unions around the country, that would be a big help to for people to get control of their finances, to learn how to invest by offering other financial instruments that they can certainly buy into, and having people there that can just offer you some sensible advice on what to do and how to save, how to invest. Those things are key. We have to get control of that process, and we currently don't have control of it. So until we understand, how to master capital, how to manage it, how to build it, we're going to all the other conversations that are great, but they're not going to matter if we don't control the banking aspect of it. So I think the work Brother Edwards is doing, we should all get behind it. And Brother Edwards, please come out with the blueprint, and let's spread the word and challenge others to do this around the country where it's needed.
And I will close out with a couple of things I've said before, and I'm going to continue to repeat them for everyone out there. It doesn't matter what lot in life you hit. It doesn't matter what area, how much income you make or how little you think you make. First, start by paying yourself first and foremost. Why? Because the government is always going to be coming for your check, and the bill collectors are always going to be there. So pay yourself first, because in order for you to accumulate wealth and or net worth, you got to have something saved up. So pay yourself first before you pay anyone else, even if it's a small amount. Number two, track your spending within your community. I've talked about this several times before. Find out, let's look at what you spent every month. How much of that did you spend with someone who looked like you? Is that 0%, 1%, 5%? And challenge yourself to increase that, because that is what I do every month. Is I go down, it's like, what is my total income? Some of it has to go to taxes, some of it has to go to the 401k someplace else. But how much of that am I spending within my community, and hold myself accountable to a minimum bar and try to increase that, whether that be with contractors, whether that be with mom and pop grocery stores. Even if they're not in my community, go to a Nigerian or a Ghanaian owned grocery store and get something. So that's my take, and that's my small contribution. Gentlemen, I want to thank both of you for this evening. Yes. This has got my brain on a smile, and I'm just telling you right now, we're going to have you back. So don't go running. We're going to have you back, because there are a couple of other things that we have to continue the conversation and wrap up on. And I'm hoping we can do this maybe within the next month. But can y'all agree to that while we're on? Because I'm putting y'all on the hook.
Oh, I mean, I would love it. I don't think Paul's going to have time, though, because if anybody listening to this, he's going to be overrun with business.
Yes. So Tom, we have an announcement to make. So don't forget that. Don't forget the announcement.
Okay, good deal. So Paul, you didn't say anything, but I'm gonna track you down until
I'm in.
Okay,
I'm in. That sounds good.
All right, good deal. All right, Jimmy, we have an announcement to make.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I forgot what the announcement is.
It was for the book fair, I think.
Yes, there we
festival.
go. Yes, there is a Dallas Literary Festival. Thank you for bringing that up. So one of our good friends who is an author and a coordinator, Miss Sandaria Faye Smith, is working on a Dallas Literary Book Festival this upcoming weekend on the 18th through the 22nd. And if I can find that, Jimmy, give me just a second. There we go. Dallas Literary Festival starting on the 18th through the 22nd. Go to DallasLiteraryFestival.org. That's DallasLiteraryFestival.org, especially for those of you who are going to be in the DFW area. You're going to have the likes of Nicole Hannah Jones, who was there at the SMU McFarland Auditorium, Charles Blow at the African American Museum of Dallas on the 20th. Hannah Jones is on March the 22nd at the SMU McFarland Auditorium. Eric Dickerson, the great Eric Dickerson, is going to be at the SMU McCord Auditorium on March the 19th. David Truer is going to be at the SMU McCord on March the 18th, and Damaris B. Hill at the SMU McCord Auditorium on March the 8th. But for more information, go to DallasLiteraryFestival.org, folks, and definitely go and support these authors. And being an author, Jimmy, I know you've written a book or two before, so it's not an easy thing. So please give them your love and support.
Yes, and
Thank you.
a couple more announcements, Tom. Future guest, Dr. Johnson, and the first show of next month, or the first show of every month, is dedicated to mentoring young men. So the mothers out there who have sons, please join the show the first Wednesday of every month, because we dedicate that to mentoring young men on how to become brothers like Brother Edwards and Brother Paul here.
Absolutely. So next week's in, folks, we're going to have one of my good friends and another great ag talk to us about cybersecurity and how it affects our life. Llewellyn Derry, Stafford, I think you know him. He's going to be with us next Wednesday. The last Wednesday of the month on the 30th, we're going to have Dr. Omar Johnson. For those of you who are aware of him, he is a national personality. He's going to talk about some interesting things. And then the first Wednesday of April, we're going to do something focused on young Black men. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us this evening. Edward, Paul, we want to thank you for joining us this evening. And we're going to have you back very soon. And
thank you,
folks. Have a great evening. Jimmy, do we need to close out, or do we have time for a brief prayer?
We always have time for a brief prayer, even though we're over. But go ahead.
Okay. All right. Dear Lord and gracious Father, we come before you this evening, thanking you for bringing us together again. Father, we thank you for having Mr. Stafford here. We thank you for having Mr. Willis here. We want to thank you for the work that they are doing within our communities. Father, we ask that you would bless their efforts, bless their inspiration, bless the energy that they have, Father, to contribute to our communities. Father, we ask that you would bless the work that we are doing, that we might say a word that may be an inspiration to someone out there. Father, we ask you would keep us focused on the things that you would have us to do, Father, and help, of course, in the words of the great Marcus Garvey, wake up this mighty race, because we know we can do what we will. In your precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.